Thunderbolts is not a good film. In fact, it's actually a great film. Now, going into this movie, I thought it was going to be one of those mediocre MCU movies. But Thunderbolts does something I don't believe a lot of MCU films follow along with, and that is creating a good story with a strong message. For time, we have seen MCU films be MCU films. And what I mean by this is that MCU films previously wouldn't really focus on the character depth, but instead of focus on the story, which doesn't really work out if the character depth is not good enough. But what Thunderbolts did was simply amazing. When they were first introduced as antagonists or anti-heroes. And then in this story, they basically get aligned forces to basically rearrange and just group up into a form of Thunderbolts. The film has a deep focus on mental health. Characters we are seeing in the film basically introduce ourselves with their mental health issues and basically how they overcome it, which is simply amazing and is a very good story narrative to see, especially with characters we aren't really much aligned to know. You're going to see the standard MCU quips, however they did a very good job in balancing that and making sure when it's the right time to be used and when it's the right time to be not. I also love how the movie doesn't shy away from using practical effects and actually doesn't rely too much on CGI, and when it does use CGI, it uses it in its right place. The supporting characters in the film were a joy to watch, although I would have loved to see more of them. But the main focal point of the story is between Lewis Pullman's Sentry and Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova, and I am so happy they went through this approach. If they was to focus on one or too many characters, I think that's when the story would actually not work. But if they focused on one character, especially Florence Pugh's character, that's where I believe it worked the most. Now, in order for me to go into full depth, I am going into spoilers, so if you'd like to skip from this time frame, please do so. You have been warned. So in the trailers, they basically introduce Bob, who's basically playing a Sentry, and in this story, we basically see him as the antagonist. We basically see him as Sentry, but in the Void version. Now, for those who don't know who Sentry is, he's basically the reiteration of Superman if he was in Marvel. So in hindsight, he's basically a very undefeatable character where he has no flaws whatsoever. For me, it was one of those problems where how would they able to overcome that problem? Because we are grouping with characters where they are pretty much super soldiers. None of them have superpowers like Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, or any of those. So my question to them was like, how were they able to represent a character like Sentry? But like I said, they did a very good job in representing Sentry by making him the focal point of mental health. He goes through addictions, he goes through depression, he goes through these episodes where we see him basically go through the void, basically be the negative version of him. And what would happen if a character like him took super soldier serum with him having so much mental health effects, and how much that would really affect the world and him. And then the dynamic from Florence Pugh, basically her facing through mental health issues too, and basically being very, very lonely, and the fact that she basically overcomes that by basically helping Lewis Pullman's Sentry was simply amazing. And it's one of those things where you have to appreciate because they've done a very good job in representing mental health and how important it can be if someone pretty much bottles up emotions and what it can do to them as a person. And yes, people will think family is part of the Fast and Furious type of vibe, but let's be honest with ourselves, this works pretty much well because it actually follows a good narrative and it actually focuses on a good character depth. They are not good characters from what we've seen in the movies. They are characters that have been through a lot, and the way they did it is to basically represent them as to how these mental health issues can affect them. But they did a very good job in that. However, in that one scene in the Void where everyone goes into the Void, especially Florence Pugh's character, where we see more of her backstory, I kind of wish we could have seen more from the other supporting characters. Like, I would have loved to see their backstory into how and what affected them the most, because it would have been great to see. But however, I kind of understand where they were coming from because they wanted to focus on one character and one character only, and that was Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova. Can't even pronounce it right. I think Valentina Allegro's character was good, although I kind of believe that some of her motivations were kind of stupid, and it just brings the question as to why she was doing this stuff, because normally this isn't really her, but I guess for the film it was just like that. But besides that, I think the whole film was good, but I just really need to talk about the post-credit scene. Not the post-credit scene where Red Guardian is in it, not him. I'm talking about that post-credit scene. And for those who watched it, I am very excited to see the Fantastic Four coming back into the Marvel franchise, the first family, and it's just a very good way to just show a glimpse of their film coming in 3 months later to this date. And it's wow, we're actually going to see Fantastic Four in the MCU. But now I've done with the spoilers, I just really need to appreciate how all the crew members, especially the director, the producer, and all that stuff, stuff. They did a very good job. I really am particularly fond with the fact that they brought A24 crew members, and especially with that trailer, how they mentioned it all with someone working in Green Knight, the Bear, and all of that stuff. And they brought them into the MCU, and they brought that style, that vision in the MCU for quite some time. And I'm very happy with the fact they did that. It has its own visual appeal, and it's pretty much stands out a lot in terms of other MCU movies. But yeah, I would like to say this is a very good film, a joy to watch. It's comedic, it focuses on the narrative, on the story and the characters, and it focuses on the deep issue on mental health, which is very, very helpful for those who are actually suffering from it. So overall, I'm going to be giving this film a 9 out of 10.